Good evening, dandies. Welcome to Undetermined, the podcast.
I'm Matt. This is John.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
As I'm certain I told you previously, I am a podcast whore, and I find myself talking to people quite often without knowing anything about them or who they are. So I should defer and let you know that I don't know anything about you or what you are.
That's okay. That's okay. Well, we know a bit about you, I think, and we'd certainly like to get to know a little bit more. So we've been doing this podcast for, about a year now. We just kind of like talking to people, different people that we find interesting and getting to know them a little bit. And really, it's more of a, we'd like to think of it more of a conversation than an interview.
Sure.
We do have a little bit in common. We've got a mutual friend in Rob Bochnik. I've known Rob for about, 15 years?
Yeah, Rob is one of the great men on earth.
He is a really good guy. I really like Rob a lot, and he's been just consistently a good person from what I can tell.
A friend of mine and I were having a conversation at one point about who would be the number one guy. If you had to have somebody, like if your life was on the line and you had one guy that you had to count on to get something done, like who would be the number one guy? And we both like simultaneously said Rob Bochnik.
That's high praise, and I believe that just from knowing him.
Now, he was with you from the beginning, too, with electrical audio.
He was here during the construction phase. We started construction in December of 95, and Rob Bochnik was here during the construction phase, and he worked here for, I want to say, 10, 12 years maybe.
Yeah, that's quite a long time.
It was quite a stretch.
Yeah. Also got the frames through your studio as a result, and everything else. It helped his career a lot. So
he met up with them. He was playing in another band that had supported the frames, and so he knew them sort of personally. And then he ended up subbing in when their guitar player took a powder, and then he and Glenn are still playing together. Like he still plays gigs with Glenn all around the world.
He seems like he's kind of Glenn's secret weapon. It seems like a lot of bands have their secret weapon, and Rob seems to be the one for Glenn and the Frames.
Yeah, he's a tremendous musician, and one of the characteristics of somebody who's just sort of a generically good musician is that you can drop them into almost any setting, and they can find a way to fit in. And Rob is very much like that. Like, I don't think that you could put him in a musical setting where he would be the turd in the punch bowl, where he would be the guy who couldn't hold up his,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you listened to Black Space Alloy?
I have.
Yeah, I really liked it.
Yeah. I'm just an all-around fan and enthusiast and evangelist for Rob Bochnik.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad we're on the same page with that.
So, yeah, that's how Matt knows Rob, or has known him for years. I just know of you. Been a big fan of yours for a long time. I'm also a Northern Illinois guy. Grew up around Morrison, Illinois. I don't know if you know where that is. It's about 2 hours outside of Chicago.
I believe you.
Yeah, over there by the Iowa border. Lots of lore or everything about you growing up. Big influence on a lot of music I've listened to. I was kind of a Wax Trax kid. Used to go there to the old brick and mortar when I was real young, but that is no more, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But he had a lot of influence on those guys. And
well, Wax Trax was an incredible resource. When I first moved to Chicago in 1980, Wax Trax was kind of the epicenter of the punk underground. Like, that's where everybody would hang out. That's where, several times a week, everybody would end up there either to buy records or as a congregation, the Marco Pizzotti from Naked Ray Gun, Jeff Pizzotti's brother, worked at Wax Trax, and there was a bar down the street from there called the Lucky Number, and that became a de facto venue through the staff from Wax Trax going there on breaks and after work and talking the owner into letting them put gigs on there. And Jim and Danny, the couple that owned and ran Wax Trax, they were instrumental in bringing bands to Chicago at other venues as well. Like they brought bands like Bauhaus and the Birthday Party, and they were like Joy Division had a gig booked in Chicago through them that got canceled when Ian Curtis killed himself, obviously. But and they were instrumental in all of those things. Like they were the people that got the ball rolling, and that store was absolutely instrumental in the development of the music scene, the underground punk scene here.
Did you get a chance to catch the documentary?
I did. I thought it was very well done. It captured a lot of what was special about those people in that place and that time. It was great to see reaffirmed that all the people that I looked up to and admired when I was a teenager and just getting my feet wet in the music scene, all these people that I thought were super smart and together and on the ball, turns out they were smart and together and on the ball, and that was really gratifying.
Yeah. So how old were you when you first landed in Lake Evanston?
I moved here to go to school in 1980, so I would have been 18 by the time I got to college. Just sort of immediately immersed myself and insinuated myself into the music scene.
But you also went to school for journalism, though, right? That's what your degree was initially.
I have a degree in journalism from the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University.
So what was your draw to that?
When I was a kid, I was really into the concept of journalism. I loved the idea that you could read about what had happened by going through old newspapers. Like I was fascinated by things like the old microfilm at the library and stuff like that, where you could go to historical dates and see what happened on that date and see how it struck people at the time. My sort of personal heroes were people who were either journalists or started out as journalists. And the film All the President's Men had come out, and that book about the Watergate scandal was really instrumental in making a generation of people of my age realize how significant journalism was politically, culturally, socially, and so I was really into the idea of being a journalist. And then as part of my journalism education, I had to work on a daily newspaper in a small town in Indiana for a semester. And that burned it right out of me. Like that beat it right out of me. Whatever my enthusiasm for journalism was, actually being a day-to-day general assignment reporter, that snubbed that out completely. You know? I didn't realize. I guess I should have realized that you weren't going to get to work on interesting stories ever, and that most of what you were doing was going to be trying to appease the local business community. I really didn't. I didn't think that journalism in practice would be as dull and uninspiring and as much of a utilitarian tool as it turned out to be. Like most local small town journalism is about maintaining power structures that have been there for, in a lot of cases, for a very long time. And the journalism is not meant to edify or educate people. It's meant to sustain.
Aggrandize, sustain.
Did you just kind of garner that as you were working, or were they just pretty blatant about it and just said, no, you're not cutting what we want you to cut?
No, it was very straightforward, just like what was being so the town I worked in was in Marion, Indiana. It was the Marion, Indiana Chronicle Tribune. So it's small town, Midwestern town, like local chamber of commerce kind of ran things. There were a few big local industries that were always treated favorably in the newspaper. Not a whiff of controversy, like essentially no coverage of the African American community, no coverage of any sort of marginalized people whatsoever. When there were, a big story would be that there was a new business that had opened that was a potential advertiser. Well, that opening was a big story. Then go cover them. Go write something about their opening.
Yeah.
I see. Follow the money, right?
I just sort of connected the dots on my own and realized that the noble notion of journalism that I carried with me since I was a teenager was had no basis in reality on the ground. It had no basis in reality.
Yeah. Now you also study art too, a little bit, painting, things like that.
Yeah, the way the journalism program at Northwestern is structured is that you have your journalism major, you have the equivalent, you have two minors. You're meant to have a humanities or social science minor, and then also a hard science or technical minor. So my actual minor was in painting. My equivalent minor was in chemistry.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
And then you were also, after that, you were also supposed to take a concentration in, for example, a social science or some other humanity or something like that. And I had a sort of a general social science concentration, so I took anthropology, sociology, and a couple of neurobiology courses. But so the point of it was that the Medill School, and I think this is a very good. I think it's a very good program for this reason. Like, as a journalism school, you weren't just reading and writing journalism. You were expected to learn how to conduct journalism, but you were also expected to have a very broad and intense general education.
Right.
And I think that's a very good model. And then
I agree.
When you graduate, you can't graduate without also having had some practical experience writing for a daily newspaper. And that's the teaching newspaper portion of the curriculum, and you're required to do that. And I think that's also very sound. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think, and what's great about that, getting a broad general education under that sort of directed guideline thing, what's great about that is that the fact that I didn't end up using my journalism degree didn't mean that I had wasted 4 years learning about something that I wasn't going to implement.
Right, you could still apply it in other
Still had
ways.
sort of a broad general education, and as it turned out, the job that I got straight out of school, I was a photograph retouch artist for advertising, and I got to use my personal interest in photography and graphic design, what I had learned from chemistry through my chemistry equivalent minor, and the rendering, drawing, and painting skills that I had learned as a painting student. I got to use all of those in this job that I then ended up being my last proper job, before I became a full-time reporting engineer.
Wow. So you also got to study under Ed Paschke a little
Ed
bit
Paschke
too.
was my advisor, and he became a friend, and
Wow.
he was supportive of Big Black. He came to see Big Black play several times. I admired Ed Paschke tremendously. I've said this before, but of all of the people that I was instructed by at Northwestern, I learned a lot while I was in college, but he's the only one who specifically taught me things.
Right.
And
that makes sense.
I will forever appreciate that. Like, on a personal level, he showed me how to do things in painting and in the appreciation of art, and also in the conduct of a creative life. He specifically taught me things that I've carried with me ever since, and I admired him tremendously. There was one practical thing that I learned from him that's also has a philosophical angle, but he would bring his students into his painting studio, and as sort of a field trip, I guess. He would bring classes into his painting studio and show them all of the paintings that he had in work, and he would invite his students to do things to his paintings, to add stuff to them, or mark them up in some way, or put obstacles in there. Just like he would just say, if you want to do some painting on my paintings, please go ahead. And that's an incredibly generous and open-minded thing to do, number one.
Yeah.
And number two, as a practical matter, the way he approached painting was that he wanted to have problems and solve them. And if someone had done something to one of his paintings then that instantly creates some situation or some problem that he's going to have to resolve, that he's going to have to solve in some way. You know, and occasionally somebody would do something bold and really intrusive in one of his paintings, so that he would then have to incorporate or nullify one way or the other. But like, he would have to deal with that as a problem, and it would give him, his own painting then became more stimulating to him. I thought that was extremely generous thing to offer his students, extremely open-minded in terms of his approach to his art, and it belied the sort of precious aspect of art as being this pure thing that can only be conjured into being under ideal circumstances. Like, he's willing to let somebody else splash paint on his canvas, and then he would just work around it. You know, that's
right.
Like, I thought that was an incredible insight that I got just from that one experience.
Do you feel you can incorporate any of that sometimes, just musically? Like, if you're working with an artist, throw them a little monkey wrench to see what comes out of it?
No, not in that way, but as an approach to art, as not being this precious thing, but as being the product of work, you know, as being the product of problem solving and addressing the tasks at hand. I mean, that's been instrumental in my approach to making records. Like, I don't care, in broad terms, I don't care about the aesthetics that my clients have, like, in that I don't have an opinion on them. I want them to have the experience that they want to have. I want their aesthetic to be presented the way they want it presented, but my job is to solve the problems. Like, if you want it to sound like the barn doors to hell have just swung open, then my job on a technical level is to resolve what that means. Like, how many dBs of gain do I need to make the barn doors of hell open at that moment? Like, that's, and that was a very useful object lesson to me, to see someone approaching literal masterpiece paintings, like paintings that were bought on they were bought on subscription long before he'd ever painted them. He was one of the premier contemporary artists of his day, and people were spending 50, 100, more thousands of dollars on his paintings, and he was not treating them as though they were precious. He was not treating them as though they were uniquely his creation. He was not treating them as though they were these fragile and delicate things where the muse had to be coaxed into existence in order to survive for the moment. It was work. He went there every day. He put in his hours. He chopped wood, and the end result of that were these paintings that he made. And I think that's a really terrific way to approach any creative enterprise. Is you put in the hours, you do the work, you make it, you take it seriously and do it. You can't sit in an opium haze and wait for the muse to alight so that you can grasp this rare idea that only comes by once in a millennium. What you have to do is you have to be an active and engaged artist, doing it constantly, thinking about it constantly, executing constantly. In order for your work to be worth anything, you need to be there doing it when you have your good idea,
Yeah. Boy, that'd be awfully intimidating. I mean, to me, I would think I'd be able to touch anything at past you at all without just completely freaking out about that.
It's incredible how, even at the time, his aesthetic was, he liked to incorporate what looked like electronic images in a painted surface. He liked to sort of synthesize the effect of television flicker or video aberrations and things like that. That was a kind of a motif in a lot of his pictures. But then also that sort of oscillating positive and negative imagery, like where the light and dark values were reversed. And what I think is great about that is that because it was a kind of a conceptual thing and not a hard rule, I'm going to paint video images like that, because it was conceptual, he could break away from it at any time and revert to a more sort of rendered imagery, or like some of his early portraits had this sort of a quilted or velour textural quality where he was where he was trying to depict a physical surface, and he was able to toggle back and forth between those modes in a very playful way, which I thought was, again, kind of indicative of his approach to the paintings themselves, was that they were not precious, that you could enjoy it, you could have fun with it as well as take it seriously.
Yeah, and when you look at some of them, I mean, that's a bold thing to do, especially when if you know his work. I suggest anybody listening, if you're not familiar with Ed Paskey, just go look up a gallery. Seeing him in person is something unbelievable, but just the bold colors, the neons, and just also the hyperrealism in the way that he was able to catch a lot of characters and in pop culture and just in culture in general.
He had a way of sort of slightly exaggerating a gesture or a posture or an affect that a character would have. He would exaggerate it slightly to the extent that we would see how preposterous that pose was. One of his most famous paintings is called Fumar, and it was just a still frame of somebody smoking, right? And that gesture is universally understood, like somebody holding two fingers up to their mouth with a cigarette, right? That's such an immediately identifiable gesture. But and he did this thing where he slightly elongated the fingers, and he slightly distorted the shape of the cigarette, and he slightly pooched the face as the face was like slightly over eager, and all of those things just made that one little gesture slightly revolting,
Right.
And it was at a time when everyone smoked. It wasn't like.
Right.
Now there's
now like smoking itself just being revolting, but just the.
But he had this way of highlighting the absurdity or the subtly disgusting aspect of just a nominal gesture. Even I was immensely impressed with his vision and his ability to communicate these ideas. Like he did portrait series of trans artists and of other like role-playing artists, like masked wrestlers and and cops and people in costume and drag artists and things like that. And he had a way of depicting them in a way that made the costume suddenly sort of elevated the character, or the costume like. I'm articulating it poorly, but the costume sort of overwhelmed the person,
Right. Yeah.
And I took that to mean that this, like, creating this sort of overtly grandiose comedy of the decoration was a way of telling you to ignore the decoration. It was a way of telling you to concentrate on the person.
Right.
That's what I took from it. I never actually talked about that particular aspect with him. But from his interactions with his students and his interactions with other people, like, he was very much about the person behind the image, or the person behind the gesture or the affect.
Sure. Yeah. And I also think he had a really cool way of sometimes even satirizing, just with imagery, things that were just like really dark subjects, and like Lee Harvey Oswald, those pictures, things like that, or the digitizing Lincoln sort of way. But it's always interesting, fascinating to me. I was really lucky to have a very progressive art teacher in a very shitty small town. It was very conservative.
It's nice how that happens sometimes.
Yeah. It is. But as a matter of fact, that art teacher, he introduced me to Paskey. He introduced me to, I think he put on some Thrill Kill Cult one day, too, in the classroom, which was funny. That's the first thing that turned me on to Wax Trax Records. Yeah, it was that art teacher. Like, don't tell your parents I'm playing you this. But I just want you to hear the beat. I want you to hear this, so, but that was a big thing about that time. And so you're incorporating all this into music, your love for art, your love for the idea of journalism, but music is mixed in there the whole time in the background. So you were.
I think it would be an overstatement to say that music was the reason I came to Chicago. But once I got to Chicago, music was like being involved in the music scene was the most important thing in my life. Like I basically first drafted every single thing I did for my academic studies, like every essay, every paper, every article, every single thing I did for 4 years at Northwestern was a first draft. I would just figure out how many hours it would take me to type it out before I needed to hand it in, and that's when I would start writing it.
Yeah.
I was a poor academic student in that regard.
Yeah.
Didn't take the schoolwork very seriously. Most of my time and energy at school was spent on the social world outside the school, like meeting people in bands, playing in a band myself, listening to records, writing for fanzines like that. I was a poor student, and I think I would have taken it more seriously if I had not gone to school immediately. If I had gone to school as an adult, I would have taken it more seriously. But the confluence of like my personal freedom of getting away from home and having that time to mature into an adult in an environment that was as perfect for me as the music scene in Chicago, like I just don't see any other way for me to have evolved.
Right. This is probably the only path that could have got you to where you are now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, in a perfectly distracting city at that time, too. A lot of great places to go, a lot of great stuff to do. Yeah, that had to be difficult. I myself went to school later on for that very reason. If there was any way I went when I was, 21, 22, there's no way I would have made it through class. I mean, I would have walked in there and said, they just let you leave? Yeah, they don't care. Really? All right, I'm out of here.
Yeah, I have some friends who sort of indulged the punk rock lifestyle for a while as teenagers and then went to school and took studies seriously later in life, and those people have all excelled. A friend of mine, Tim Idjit, was in the band Silkworm, and they toured relentlessly when he, in his early 20s, and then I think he might have been 30 years old when he decided to get an engineering degree, and since then he's made use of that and has done very well. Santiago Durango, the guitar, Big Black, took some time off after his undergraduate studies and then went to law school as an adult, and he's been a very important attorney in the appellate division of the public defender's office in Illinois. Like he argued a few years ago there was a review of every death penalty case in the state.
I remember that.
Police abuse and owing to the amount of lying and malpractice that the prosecution of death penalty cases entailed, and he argued several of those death penalty cases on their reexamination. Another friend, John Kesdy, who was the singer from the Effigies, and he went to law school as an adult, and he became a state's attorney. Like all of those things sort of imply that if you really want to take school seriously, you shouldn't do it when you're a teenager.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of those things that are backward in education. Just like I always thought it was funny how in a lot of degrees and everything, they always wrap it up with theory. And it's like, shouldn't you start it off with theory? That would make the most sense to me. But aside from that, you decide, and you did graduate. You got that in. Congratulations. You made it here.
Yeah, I didn't go to the ceremony. I didn't get a diploma.
Oh, you didn't walk. Yeah.
I found out when I was going to graduate, they sent a notice around to everybody in the graduating class. Like they sent a form out, like if you wanted to go to the ceremony, tick this box. If you want your parents to come, tick this box. And it was like there was some absurd fee to go to the ceremony and get a diploma, and some absurd fee to have anybody in attendance. I was like, fuck that! I'm not doing any of that.
Right.
So I never actually physically received my degree. And a couple years ago, my mom and my wife conspired with the bursar at Northwestern University to get me a degree.
A diploma.
So get me my diploma. So I actually have a physical diploma now of my journalism degree.
So it's real now. Yeah.
It actually happened. It's documented.
I didn't count it until mine came in the mail. I was afraid to. Like, I'd been through too much. Just, floor's going to drop out from under me.
Yeah.
Until I had that piece of paper, I wasn't convinced it happened.
Right.
Yeah, by the time I graduated, by the time the physical graduation happened, I had already lined up a job. So, I was like, well, I don't actually I'm not going to have to wave my diploma at anybody. So
Right.
It didn't matter. None of that mattered to me.
Yeah. And that was the photography job, right? The retouching?
Yeah.
Yep, you're doing. Yeah. And then I'm supposing during that time, that's when you just started hooking up with other musicians or people that you met. Now, you played a bit of bass, was that right?
I was bass player when I was a teenager in Montana, and then the band I played in Chicago when I first got here. I played bass. I played bass in a band called Stations, who were kind of an arty new wave band, and then I played bass in a punk band of no repute, and then I thought of myself as a bass player when I started Big Black, just doing overdubbing myself on a 4-track. But then by the time we got to a state where we could play shows live, Jeff Pizzotti, who had agreed to play bass, who had agreed to play guitar, and while I played bass, he was a better bass player than he was guitar player, and so I let him play the bass and I played the guitar. And then Santiago joined, and that was sort of a catalyst for me. He was my favorite guitar player. I slightly idolized him. And when he came downstairs, they were sharing a coach house where we were practicing. And when he came downstairs and put on his guitar and said, "Do you mind if I join in?" I was like, that's sort of like you and your buddies playing in the garage, and then, Jimi Hendrix walks in.
Right.
I jam with you. Like it was I'm exaggerating slightly, but only slightly.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, I remember, what was it? That's going back to like Glenn Hansard's story, how he met Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan just kind of eavesdropped on one of their practices that they were having. Nobody told him he was coming.
It sounds great.
And and that was how I met him. Mind if I stop in? I had a friend playing a coffee shop when he was in college, and Jeff Buckley dropped in on him and joined his band. That was pretty cool.
Nice. Nice that works out. Yeah. So,
I don't have any good stories like that.
Yeah. No, not at all.
I bet you've provided a few stories like that, though. I think a lot of people would be pretty excited to have you drop in on them.
I think most of those stories are things like my band was playing and Steve Albini got a glass of water from the bar and left. That's my guess at like the majority of stories with my name in them or something on that order.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure I saw the back of his head. Yeah.
You'll never guess who I was in the toilet next to.
Right. Yeah, I was just reading a story just like that earlier today about Bowie. I had a post online how he took a leak next to him. That was the most amazing thing that ever happened to him in that guy's life. From looking poor bastard.
Yeah, I guess that's sort of a way to gauge somebody's actual celebrity. Is
right.
How memorable it would be if you ran into them at a public urinal. Like a lot of people, you would be like, well, of course that guy is there in the public urinal. Who cares? But on some people, it would be like, wow, doesn't this guy like have a custom, like a urine van that follows him around the public urinal?
A built-in suit like they use in the space shuttle.
Right.
Yeah, they don't have to go into public bathrooms. Yeah.
He's got the celebrity catheter.
Right. Limited edition. Yeah. Made by Roland.
Probably, yeah, and then they could sell his signature model catheter on Fox.
We're on to something here.
Yeah. So eventually, and I'm sorry to hear about his passing and everything last year, but so Dave Riley comes in then to eventually to Big Black. And how was that turnover? How was that transformation for you?
Well, Jeff was getting at the time. Jeff had graduated from school, and he'd taken a job at this big HVAC company that his dad ran, and then his dad was in the process of selling that company, and he was starting his own company, and he was in 2 or 3 other bands at the time, and he was just stretched super thin. So he wanted to get out. He wanted to, he wanted somebody to take over playing bass in Big Black. He didn't want to break up the band. He just didn't have time to keep doing it. So Santiago and I were sort of bouncing names around, and both of us there was this band in town called Savage Beliefs, and both of us thought they were a really great, really stylish band, and that Dave Riley, their bass player, was a sort of uniquely talented guy. Like he was a guitar player primarily, so his approach to playing the bass was more like a guitar player, like busier parts, taking up more of the space, like using a more aggressive sound, that sort of stuff. And we both thought he would be great if he could do it, that he would be great. And he picked everything up very quickly. He was a good musician. He picked everything up quickly and started contributing to the band immediately. He had a way of, if we were working on a song and we were just playing through it, on repeat, just playing the song.
Yeah.
Every time through, he would come up with some additional subtlety about his part that would eventually make it so that the bass part was extremely distinctive. And there are a lot of the Big Black songs, you would recognize them from hearing him play the bass part sooner than the other aspect of the song. And that's a testament to his, he took it seriously, and he tried to own the moment whenever possible. He would find a spot where he could own the moment, and I thought that was great.
Yeah. Yeah.
He wasn't passive. It's not like he wanted to sit in the back and fit in and let me and Santiago do the heavy lifting. He wanted to, have a voice in the band, and I thought that was great. That was exactly what we needed. Yeah.
Yeah. You can definitely hear that in that drive, I think, especially. Yeah. Well, a lot of those parts aren't easy keeping time on that for, especially the very kind of loop-based and repetitive, that shit's difficult. I always respected him for that.
I also like the fact that he was from Detroit, and he was pretty steeped in the black music out of Detroit, and mostly the soul and funk and psychedelic, the funkadelic stuff. And he had a way of incorporating some of that personality without mimicking any of the idiomatic stuff. He wasn't doing popping and slapping. All of us were kind of recoiled when we saw corny white guys doing that. That sort of grated on all of us. The people who invent those styles and the people who own them and live in them, they can do it naturally and comfortably, and it seems perfect, right? But somebody affecting that and putting it on like a baseball cap is just grating,
Right.
So, but he had a way of incorporating some of that melodic sense and some of that sort of the bass as center of the groove kind of thing. He could do that in a way that seemed personal and seemed suited to his rocking style, as opposed to it sounding like he was mimicking somebody else.
Well, and I don't want to either keep drilling you on music questions that I know you've answered a bazillion goddamn times in your life. But you still playing poker?
I am.
You are?
There's not a lot of poker going down under the quarantine.
Right.
There are some informal online games with friends, where you're on a private server or you're in a private club, that sort of thing. And then there's very limited live poker in a private game setting where the COVID protocols can be very strictly adhered to, where everybody's masked up and wearing gloves, and there's a minimum number of people in the building, and everything is kept very tight. I have been sort of trepidatious about that.
Sure.
The places, the people that I've seen running games like that have been scrupulous so far, and that's given me confidence. That's made me feel like people are starting to take all of this shit more seriously, and people are starting to do a better job sort of generally with the virus protocols.
Yeah.
And that's obviously going to be the key toward any kind of socialization in the future, is people taking all of these things seriously. Like, it might not seem like a big deal that you just hopped into a car with a friend of yours, but if you're in a confined space like that, you're much greater risk of transmitting the virus. So you have to put your mask on, even if it's, you were just outside in their backyard and you didn't have your mask on, and now you're in the car with them. That's when you have to put the mask on.
Right. Yeah.
Like that sort of thing. And it does give me some confidence that people are taking that stuff more seriously. It's a very charitable and selfless kind of behavior, and I'm glad to see it sort of across the board. I'm glad.
We're starting to see a little bit more here in red state America. It's it's a real slow process turning some people around. And I know I've got a lot of family in like southern Missouri that are still convinced, it's all a conspiracy and we're just trying to take away your rights. And
right, that's a sort of a greater clue that you can write those people off generally. And I mean, those people clearly don't care about other people, and you can cling to those people in a kind of a sentimental fashion, like, I've known these people my whole life. I don't want to think they're bad people, but they're behaving like bad people.
Right,
and you can either believe them that that's the kind of people that they are, or you can persist with a kind of a personal ambition for them that they'll grow and mature. But it's unsafe to do that.
Right.
And you can only protect yourself so much.
Right.
So, I'm firmly of the suffer no fools camp in this, as regards the coronavirus, just because it is so devastating. I mean, we all have friends and family who have died from it by now, and that's an indication enough that it's just not worth indulging somebody's ignorance. Like,
right.
it's just not worth it. Like, the stakes are too high. I have a sick wife at home. I can't bring the virus home,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and like you say, the contact tracing thing is just so, and it's scary and mind-boggling in itself. It's like, I can remember back in the 80s when they would tell us, like, during the AIDS epidemic, and it was, just to remember, every time you have sex with someone, you've had sex with the same person, or,
right.
everyone else.
Everyone they've had sex with. Yeah.
Right. And it's like, we've forgotten that lesson. It's like breathing. It's like, now you're breathing everything. But,
and we don't have anywhere near the speed or the capacity of testing to allow for useful contact tracing. Right. Like, it just doesn't exist in this country because there's been a complete failure on a federal level. We just don't have the capacity. We can't even do contact tracing.
Right.
Like, let's say you come down with symptoms and you're allowed to get a test, and you go to get a test, and it takes you 10 days to get the results of your test. By that time, by the time that has happened, the number of people that you would need to enumerate in your contact list would just be enormous, and you will have, for sure, forgotten the people who are most likely to have given you the virus in the first place, because they will.
Oh yeah. Yep. Or who you've been around, who they've been around. That whole degrees of separation.
Yeah, you need to have constant and fast testing in order for contact tracing to be valuable, and we don't have it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. People are waiting in line for 8 hours in 3-digit temperatures just to be able to take a test.
Yeah. Yeah. If they can even get the protocols passed to qualify to get a test. That's a problem. But it's affecting everything, man. We were just talking last night about it, and especially, well, you've never been a fan of let's say, any industry, music industry, or I don't know. Is there any industry you're a fan of?
I have a general suspicion of capitalism, and I think that's healthy.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
I mean, that suspicion goes as far as me not wanting to think in capitalist terms about anything.
Right. But I guess the question is, just with how this is affecting things like the music industry, like I said, you've never been a fan of in the first place. And are you trying to view that maybe there's going to be more positives come out the other end of this when it's over? or do you think it's just going to?
This is awful. There's no silver lining.
There's no silver lining. Opinion. Yeah.
There are some people who are persisting, and people are doing, in isolation. People are doing some creative stuff, and it does lighten the mood slightly that you can see some people who are ingenious enough to be creative and productive in isolation. Mm-hmm. And there are some slightly empowering things, just like how the reach of social media is being more appreciated as a legitimate venue for people to express themselves, and people, for getting music out now. Like previously, like things that didn't come through the industry filter were not taken that seriously, and now just the fact that somebody can post up a song on YouTube and it can become a worldwide sensation, like that seems, and then it can get mirrored on other platforms, and there are things like the way the background music on Twitch streams, for example,
right?
Like a topic of conversation, like people trying to actively promote their music to be used on Twitch, or waiving the rights so that their music can become more ubiquitous on gaming channels, things like that. Like there have been changes made during the pandemic that are positive, I guess, but none of it supplants or none of it substitutes adequately for the communal sensation of being in a room full of people playing music, which who knows when that's fucking coming back. Like
right.
Years before that is a viable reality. And also just being in your band, like getting together a couple of times a month and practicing with people that you love and want to create with. Like that's a rare thing now. Like my band hasn't rehearsed together. We were on tour, and our tour was interrupted by the shutdown. And at the beginning, our tour was less than 2 weeks, and at the beginning of the 2 weeks, it was people were aware of the coronavirus. It didn't, it seemed like we had to keep an eye out for it, but it didn't seem like it was going to be an imminent threat to us or the tour or anybody else. And by the end of the tour, we were just convinced that it was unsafe for us to do shows in front of people. So we should not be the reason that people were congregating. We should not be performing in front of groups of people. Groups of people should not be assembling. Let's cancel the tour. But it was at the very end of the tour, so we only lost it. So that was sort of mid-March when that happened. Our tour shut down the second week of March, and we haven't been in each other's company since then.
Yeah.
As a band.
Yeah. So you're kind of pushing forward a year, like a lot of artists we've been talking to, that's what they've been doing.
We have some shows tentatively scheduled for December, I think, on the West Coast. I think it's incredibly optimistic to think that they will come off.
I agree.
My inclination is not to sweat it and just assume that they won't happen.
Yeah.
Assume that, there's so much happening right now that is more important than whether or not my band gets its record out or whether or not my band gets to this and play shows. I'm 100% okay leaving all of that stuff on the back burner until the rest of the world sorts out some of these bigger problems, and then we can get back to me and my petty diversions,
Right. Yeah. Well, people are concerned. People like distraction. People like diversions too. So, I mean, don't feel like it's too petty. You serve a purpose. It's really needed right now too.
That's true of everything like that. But I'm just saying that for myself, I'm never going to feel aggrieved that we don't get to practice, that we don't get to play. We were in the middle of recording an album. We had sessions scheduled to finish recording an album. We had to put all of that on hold, on ice.
Right. Yeah.
I will never feel aggrieved that it was us that suffered for that.
Right.
Never.
No woe is me over that. Yeah. When you're looking at all the other woes of the world. And and so many of them, man, it just seems like America is on fire. Well, in the world too, in a lot of ways. It's a crazy simulation. Really, talking about social media too, just creates a strange bubble of how we're perceiving everything. We can't get out and talk to each other about it. We can't get out.
I feel like social media is actually, of the placebos for socialization. I think that social media is one of the better ones.
Yeah.
Just because you get an unfiltered look at what people have on their mind.
Yeah.
And, you know, you cut a stripe through humanity and you see all of them. You see, like, the good guys, the bad guys, the self-interested people, the, you know, the jagoffs, the ignorant, the wonderful, the generous, the, you know, the charitable. Like, you see all of these people for what they are, and I think that that's good. You know, I'm not one of those people. I'm 58 years old, just turned 58, right? So a lot of people of my generation discount social interaction over the internet as some kind of a not real phenomenon. They say, well, people are buried in their phones and they're not engaging in the world. No. They're using
engaging.
phones to engage in the world. Like, you know, and I feel like the sort of hidebound stubbornness of people of my generation about only allowing certain kinds of interaction or only taking certain kinds of expression or interaction seriously, I feel like that's toxic. And I think we have to take seriously people whose principal mode of communication is their social media. I don't think that that's any worse than publishing a newsletter, you know, which is,
yeah.
You know,
the Luddites never going to prosper. And I mean, I think that's one thing too, when you look at one of my favorite memes on that was on social media, where it was this, you know, picture of these, like, oh, these kids are on their cell phones and distracted these days. Nobody talks to each other. And it shows a scene from like a 1920s, you know, train. Everybody has a newspaper in their hand and they're just buried.
Exactly.
Same thing, only analog.
And I would say, you know, that's kind of got me started on. I feel like I'm engaged with a huge community that I couldn't be otherwise engaged with. Like, I become. Are you familiar with the Australian band Cordrazine?
Doesn't ring a bell.
Really good band, and with the singer Hamish Cowan has become one of my best friends. Like, I talk to him all the time, and we're constantly just like comparing what the world is like here as to what it is there, and the environment and the views and we get to talk to Leslie Rankin. You know, she's become one of our. We get to just get an idea of what it's like in Scotland, you know, and really we're trying to get a more rounded view than I think we're going to get if we're just staying locally in the discussion. And I appreciate that I'm able to have that through social media.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge consumer of social media. I have a Twitter account, but I keep it private. I never go on Facebook these days. Like, Facebook seems like the worst of all of them.
Yeah.
I don't have a TikTok account, but I have a bunch of text threads on my phone where my, you know, like groups of various different self-identified tribes have created these text threads. And I find those tremendously engaging. Like, I feel like that's a really good way for a peer group or a group of comrades to, like, have a coffee klatch every morning without actually having to physically go to the coffee shop, you know?
Yeah. So are you finding any ways to stay busy, you know, in the studio? I know you're typically an analog guy and prefer it that way.
Our studio has reopened to an extent, to a limited extent, with very severe COVID protocols in place. Like, everyone has to be masked inside the building at all times. We're doing what we can to make it as safe as we possibly can. We wouldn't be comfortable doing it otherwise. So we do a complete disinfection of every studio in between sessions. So every time there's a change of engineer or band, every surface in the building, every surface in the studio, every tool that was used, every amplifier, every cable, every microphone, all of it gets disinfected. It's a lot of extra work, and, you know, it doesn't pay anything to do that work. You just have to do it. And I wouldn't be comfortable running sessions under any other circumstance. I mean, I wouldn't be comfortable running sessions without going through these protocols. We had a group chat with the staff of the studio, and we sort of brainstormed what we thought the best practices were. Our studio manager, Taylor, our office Wolf, his sibling is a doctor, and we got recommended products and protocols on surfaces, and we've outfitted the staff with masks of a recommended design. we provide masks to everybody that comes in the building. We provide sanitizers and wipes and gloves to anybody who wants them. Like, we're doing what we can to make it as safe an environment as possible.
Right.
Recognizing that we cannot be perfect, but I think it's incumbent on us to be as responsible as it is possible to be.
Right.
Not just because we don't want to infect other people, but because if we are the cause for a congregation, like if we get people together to do a recording session and one of them gets sick as a result, I would feel fucking awful,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Right.
So it's a purely selfish move on my part to be as diligent as we are, because I don't want to feel awful, you know.
Yeah.
I wish more people took it that seriously, though, too. Right.
Yeah, and I wish more were realistic about it. You know, as you say, I tend to agree with you. There's not a silver lining that I can foresee either, and it's refreshing to hear anybody at least be honest about that. And you know, just I think so many of us are fooling ourselves too, or you know, they just doing their own self-therapy to say, you know, yes, we're going to come out of this with a.
There are some people who are just constitutionally optimistic, and they want to see the potential for some greater good to come out of all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't say they're wrong. I just don't share that optimism, and I see things getting worse. I see that happening around me. I don't see them getting better except in very small and very personal ways.
Yeah.
And those things, I think, will continue to be responsible and good. The greater movement of society, I don't see getting better in terms of its virus protocols. Like, be with you one sec.
Oh, you're good.
Hello, Electrical. So that phone call was a prank that was played on me by a friend of mine that has yielded tremendous results over the years. He has taken to, whenever he gets a telemarketing call, he makes a point of referring the telemarketers to me as someone who would be
interested,
exceedingly excited and interested in their product or service. Today's phone call was a timeshare resort.
Nice.
How long has this been going
on? At least a year.
Nice. Nice. The best anyone ever got me, I had like an old girlfriend that sent my information into a bedwetting clinic. They kept calling, and I just didn't have the heart to tell them. And she told them I had a kid, and that, and I didn't have the heart to like. This legit job. I'm sure they're getting punked a lot, and I didn't want to like just say, "No, you're getting punked again," you know. Yeah. So I was nice to them, but they kept calling back, and I finally had to say, "Look, this is all a scam. I'm sorry." And what I really wanted to do though, and say, "Oh, he's with his mother now. Here's her number."
Here's her number. That would have been the best.
Didn't want to. Yeah, I wanted to, but I just couldn't keep that going. It seemed too cruel to the other party.
The best one I can think of is my dad got a friend of his once. It was around January. He ran an ad in the paper back when people pay attention to those, and it was in the beginning of January. He said that this guy owned a catfish farm, and he needed old Christmas trees. He said, I own a catfish farm. He, ran the ad as the guy and said, I need as many old Christmas trees as you can possibly bring me so I can sink them in the ponds and it creates like shelter for the fish. He said, but only drop them off between like these hours. And it was the hours that the dude was at work. Every day he'd come home, there'd be like 20 old Christmas trees with tinsel and crap all over.
Extremely devious, and I admire that prank.
That's right. He had to time it just right for it being after the holidays, and everything. It was perfect. Yeah, it went on for a good 2 or 3 weeks until he had to run a bigger retraction in the paper. There was like no more Christmas trees. This is a prank, and I hope nobody read that. Yeah, or I hope somebody read that part. I've always thought that was a great one. Yeah, my dad was pretty clever. Well, we don't want to keep you on all day or anything, but it was great to talk to you.
Thank you for having me. It was fun talking to you.
Yeah, we really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. All right. Take care.
Right.
You've been listening to Undetermined the podcast. Special guest, Steve Albini. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Stay safe.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.